There's a specific type of exhaustion that shows on a man's face around age 40. Not physical tiredness. Something deeper. It's the exhaustion of someone who's spent decades performing for an audience that never stops demanding more. He's checked all the boxes society told him to check. Good job, nice house, respectable marriage, well-behaved children. And yet, sitting alone at night, he feels profoundly empty. Like he's lived someone else's life, while his actual life remained unlived. Carl Jung understood this pattern better than almost anyone. He recognized that most men spend their entire existence seeking approval from external sources, parents, partners, peers, society, while completely abandoning the only approval that actually matters, their own. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why approval seeking is the quiet death of masculine potential, how Jung's concept of individuation explains the emptiness that success never fills, and why the man who lives for others' validation dies without ever meeting himself. Maybe you're that exhausted man looking at decades of choices made to satisfy everyone except yourself. Or maybe you're younger, just beginning to feel the suffocation of living according to external expectations. Either way, what Jung discovered will show you the prison you're building one approval at a time. Let me paint you a scene that happens in corporate offices everywhere. A man in his mid-30s sits in a meeting. His boss suggests an idea that he knows won't work. He has data. He has experience. He knows a better approach, but he nods along, because disagreeing might create tension, might affect his review, might damage his reputation as a team player. So he swallows his truth, supports the inferior idea, and collects his approval points. This moment seems small, strategic even, but Jung would see it as catastrophic, because in that moment the man chose external validation over internal truth. He betrayed his own knowledge, his own instinct, his own voice, and he did it for approval. From which city are you watching this? Recognize this pattern. I want to know where this message is reaching men who've been sacrificing their truth for validation they never actually needed. Jung spent his entire career studying what he called individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self rather than the self others need you to be. And he discovered something tragic. Most people never individuate. They spend their entire lives as psychologically unborn, living according to programming they never questioned, seeking approval from authorities they never examined, performing roles they never chose. The masculine version of this tragedy is particularly insidious, because society disguises approval seeking as masculine virtues. Being a good provider, that's seeking approval from a partner who needs security. Being a team player, that's seeking approval from colleagues and bosses. Being a responsible citizen, that's seeking approval from social structures. These aren't inherently wrong, but when they're done primarily for approval, rather than authentic alignment with your values, they become the mechanism of your psychological death. Here's the first truth about approval seeking that Jung understood. Every time you choose approval over authenticity, you abandon a piece of yourself. And abandoned pieces don't disappear. They accumulate in what Jung called the shadow, the repository of everything you've rejected about yourself to fit external expectations. The man performing in that meeting abandoned his intellectual honesty. That honesty doesn't evaporate. It goes into his shadow. The man who stops pursuing his passion because his family thinks it's impractical, his passion doesn't die. It goes into his shadow. The man who moderates his personality to avoid making others uncomfortable, those authentic aspects don't vanish. They go into his shadow, and the shadow grows. Year after year of choosing approval over authenticity, the shadow becomes massive. It contains all your unlived potential, all your authentic desires, all the versions of yourself you killed to be acceptable. And this shadow creates the exhaustion, because maintaining it requires enormous psychological energy. You're not just living your performed life, you're also suppressing your actual life. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The man seeking approval has made his entire authentic self unconscious. He's buried it so deeply that he's forgotten it exists, and then he wonders why success feels empty, why achievement brings no satisfaction, why he's accomplished everything and feels nothing. Because he accomplished it for approval. and approval never fills the void that abandoning yourself creates. Here's the pattern Jung observed across thousands of patients. Men come to him in midlife crisis, successful by every external measure, miserable by every internal measure, and they can't understand why. They did everything right. They got the approval they sought. They checked every box. Why isn't it enough? Jung's answer was devastating. You got approval for being someone you're not. That approval validates a performance, not a person. And deep in your psyche, you know the difference. The approval you're receiving isn't actually for you. It's for the role you're playing. And no amount of applause for your performance can satisfy the authentic self you abandoned to give that performance. Think about what men sacrificed for approval. The career path they actually wanted, abandoned for the career their father respected. The creative pursuits that brought them alive, shelved because they weren't practical enough for a responsible adult. The friendships that fed their soul, dropped because their partner didn't understand them. The authentic personality, moderated and edited until nothing dangerous or interesting remains. Each sacrifice seemed reasonable at the time. Small trade-offs for social acceptance, professional success, domestic harmony. But Jung understood that these aren't small trade-offs. They're pieces of your soul exchanged for validation from people who don't actually know you, because you've never shown them your authentic self. The second truth about approval seeking is that it's literally impossible to satisfy, because approval is external. You don't control it. No matter how perfectly you perform, someone will always want something different. Your boss wants more productivity. Your partner wants more attention. Your parents want different choices. Society wants better conformity. There's no finish line where everyone finally approves completely. The game never ends. It just demands more. Jung saw men destroy themselves chasing approval that kept moving further away. They worked harder, achieved more, sacrificed deeper, and still approval remained just beyond reach, because they were trying to satisfy external judges using external criteria that constantly shifted. This is psychological torture. Spending your entire life trying to hit a target that moves every time you get close. Never being enough because enough is defined by others, and others always want more. The only escape is stopping the chase, withdrawing your energy from seeking external approval and redirecting it toward building internal approval. But this requires something most men never develop: the courage to disappoint people. The third truth is that approval seeking is psychological childhood extended into adulthood. Children need approval. Their survival depends on pleasing caregivers. Seeking parental approval is appropriate development for a 7-year-old. But most men never outgrow this pattern. They just transfer it. They stop seeking approval from parents and start seeking it from bosses, partners, peers, society. The authority changes. The dynamic doesn't. Jung called this phenomenon remaining in the psychological state of the son. The son needs approval from the father. The son modifies his behavior to receive that approval. The son's entire sense of worth depends on external validation. This is natural for actual sons. It's pathological for 40-year-old men. But most men never make the transition. They remain psychological sons their entire lives, constantly looking for father figures to approve of them. The boss becomes father. The mentor becomes father. Even the partner can become father, an authority whose approval determines their worth. Jung believed psychological maturity requires killing the father, not literally, symbolically. It means stopping the desperate search for parental approval from authority figures and learning to approve of yourself based on your own values and standards. Most men never complete this killing. They remain sons forever, seeking validation from whatever authority figure appears in their life. The fourth truth is that approval seeking destroys creativity. Jung understood that creativity requires accessing unconscious material, bringing shadow content into conscious expression. But the man who's built his entire life around approval has locked his shadow away. Everything authentic, everything dangerous, everything that might not receive approval lives in the shadow. And creativity lives there too. When you've spent decades training yourself to only express what receives approval, you've severed your connection to creative source. Because creative source doesn't care about approval. It cares about authentic expression. Great art, great ideas, great innovations, they don't come from the parts of yourself that seek approval. They come from the parts you've been suppressing, the parts that are too weird, too different, too authentic to guarantee social acceptance. This is why successful approval seekers often feel creatively dead. They've optimized their entire existence for external validation. And in doing so, they've killed access to the unconscious material that feeds genuine creativity. They can reproduce, they can refine, but they can't create, because creation requires expressing shadow material, and their shadow is locked behind decades of approval-seeking conditioning. The fifth truth is that approval-seeking creates depression that doesn't respond to success. Jung treated countless men who had everything and felt nothing: wealth, status, respect, families, and crushing depression that made no sense to them. They'd think, I have everything I'm supposed to want. Why do I feel like this? Jung's answer was always the same. You have everything your performed self was supposed to want. Your actual self, the one you abandoned for approval, has none of what it needs. And that self is dying. This depression isn't chemical imbalance. It's not irrational. It's your psyche screaming about the abandonment. Your authentic self is trying to tell you that you're living the wrong life. But you can't hear it because you've spent decades training yourself to ignore internal signals in favor of external approval. The depression is appropriate. What's inappropriate is continuing to ignore what it's trying to communicate. The sixth truth is that men seek approval because they never developed internal authority. Jung's concept of the self with a capital S represents the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, integrated into wholeness. Developing the self means building internal authority. You become your own judge, your own validator, your own source of approval. But this development requires work most men never do. It requires examining inherited beliefs. It requires questioning social programming. It requires the terrifying process of deciding for yourself what's valuable, what's meaningful, what's worth pursuing. Most men avoid this work. It's easier to adopt external authorities. Let society tell you what success means. Let your partner tell you what being a good man means. Let your profession tell you what achievement means. Outsourcing authority is comfortable. Building internal authority is excruciating. But without internal authority, you're forever dependent on external approval. Forever performing for judges whose standards you never chose and can never fully satisfy. The seventh truth is that approval seeking makes you manipulable. Jung understood that people without internal authority can be controlled through their need for validation. Every advertisement, every social pressure, every cultural expectation operates by triggering approval seeking. Buy this to be respected. Achieve this to be valued. Conform to this to be accepted. The man with strong internal authority is immune to these manipulations. He knows what he values. He knows what matters to him. External attempts to shame or pressure him into different behaviors fail because he's not seeking external approval. But the approval seeker is perfectly manipulable. Threaten to withhold approval and he'll modify his behavior. Promise approval and he'll chase it. His entire life becomes a response to external pressures because he has no internal anchor. This makes him useful to systems that need compliant, controllable people. But it makes his life a continuous performance for others' benefit, never his own. The eighth truth is that approval seeking destroys intimate relationships. Jung wrote extensively about the importance of authentic encounter between two whole people. But approval seekers can't have authentic encounters. They're too busy performing. In relationships, the approval seeker presents an edited version of himself. He shows the parts he thinks will receive approval. He hides the parts that might generate judgment. He becomes what he thinks his partner wants rather than revealing who he actually is. This creates relationships built on performance rather than genuine connection. She falls in love with the performance, but the performer is exhausted because maintaining the performance requires constant energy. He can never relax, never be fully himself, never stop managing her perception of him. And intimacy dies, because intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires showing the parts of yourself that might not receive approval. The approval seeker can't risk that, so he stays behind his mask, maintaining his performance, wondering why the relationship feels hollow. The ninth truth is that seeking approval from women specifically destroys masculine polarity. Jung understood psychological polarity as essential to attraction. The masculine operates from internal direction. The feminine responds to that direction. But when a man seeks approval from a woman, he inverts the polarity. He makes her the authority. He asks for her permission, her validation, her approval before he acts. This kills attraction. Not because women are cruel, because psychological polarity requires the masculine to be self-directed. When a man constantly seeks female approval, he's operating from feminine energy, seeking external validation, needing consensus. And feminine energy doesn't create attraction with feminine energy. This is why men who make their partners the source of their self-worth watch attraction die. They think they're being good partners by caring deeply about her approval, but they're actually destroying the polarity that created attraction in the first place. The 10th truth is that approval-seeking prevents individuation, Jung's entire purpose. Individuation is becoming who you actually are, but approval-seeking requires becoming who others need you to be. These are opposite processes. You can individuate or you can seek approval. You cannot do both. Individuation requires saying no to collective expectations. It requires developing your own values even when they conflict with social norms. It requires honoring your authentic nature, even when that nature makes others uncomfortable. Every one of these requirements directly contradicts approval-seeking. The approval seeker cannot say no to collective expectations without losing approval, cannot develop contrary values without social punishment, cannot honor authentic nature without making people uncomfortable and losing their validation. So men face a choice, though most never consciously make it: individuate and lose approval, or seek approval and abandon individuation. Jung believed that choosing approval over individuation creates neurosis, psychological sickness, the exhaustion of living as someone you're not. The 11th truth is that approval-seeking creates what Jung called persona identification. The persona is the mask you wear, the social role you perform. Everyone has personas: worker, partner, friend. These are functional. Problems arise when you identify completely with your personas and forget there's an actual person beneath them. The approval seeker does exactly this. He's performed for so long that he's forgotten he's performing. The mask has become the face. He is the good employee, the responsible husband, the dutiful son. These aren't roles he plays. They're what he thinks he is. Jung said this is psychological catastrophe, because when you identify completely with your personas, your actual self remains undeveloped, unconscious, trapped in shadow. You become a collection of performances with no authentic core. And when the performances fail, when you lose the job, when the marriage ends, when the social role disappears, you experience total collapse. Because without your personas, without your performances, you don't know who you are. The 12th truth is that approval-seeking makes you resent the very people whose approval you sought. Jung understood resentment, the psychological poison that builds when you betray yourself to please others. Every time you sacrifice your truth for someone's approval, a small amount of resentment accumulates. You resent them for requiring the sacrifice. You resent yourself for making it. This resentment hides beneath the surface. You can't express it because you're still seeking their approval, but it's there, growing, poisoning the relationship. Eventually, you realize you've spent decades sacrificing yourself for people you now resent. You gave them everything, and their approval never made you happy. It only made you bitter. This bitterness is your psyche's rage at the betrayal. You betrayed your authentic self for validation, and the validation was worthless. The 13th truth is that approval-seeking is fundamentally based on fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of exclusion, fear of being seen as inadequate. These fears run the entire operation. Jung believed that psychological health requires confronting fear, integrating it, transcending it. But approval-seeking is avoiding fear by conforming. It's saying, I'll become what you want so you won't reject me. I'll hide who I am so you won't judge me. I'll perform acceptability so I won't be excluded. This strategy seems to work. It prevents immediate rejection, but it creates a deeper problem. You're building your entire life on fear. Every choice, every behavior, every performance is motivated by avoiding rejection rather than expressing authentic self. And a life built on fear is a life that never becomes fully lived, because fear creates contraction, and life requires expansion. The 14th truth is that men seek approval because they never learned self-approval. Jung understood that psychological health requires developing what he called the ego-self axis, a strong connection between your conscious mind and your deeper, authentic nature. This connection creates internal approval. You know yourself. You accept yourself. You approve of yourself based on alignment with your own nature and values. But most men never develop this. They're taught early that their worth comes from external achievement and validation. Good grades earn approval. Athletic success earns approval. Career achievement earns approval. Nowhere in this process do they learn to generate approval internally. So they reach adulthood completely dependent on external sources. Without self-approval, you're forever chasing it from others. With self-approval, others' opinions become interesting data, but not determinative of your worth. The 15th truth is that seeking approval keeps you psychologically young. Jung's individuation process is about psychological maturation, moving from dependence to independence, from outer direction to inner direction, from collective programming to individual consciousness. Approval seeking prevents this maturation. You remain dependent on others' validation. You remain outer directed, constantly adjusting to please external judges. You remain collectively programmed, never examining whether society's values align with your authentic nature. This arrested development creates men who are chronologically 40, but psychologically 14, still desperate for approval, still performing for validation, still unable to trust their own judgment above others' opinions. The 16th truth is that approval seeking makes you invisible. Jung believed that authentic self-expression is how you become visible to others and to yourself. But the approval seeker never expresses his authentic self. He only expresses what he thinks will receive approval. So nobody ever sees him. They see his performance. They approve of his role. But him, his actual authentic nature, remains hidden, unseen, unknown. This creates profound loneliness. You can be surrounded by people who approve of you and feel completely alone, because they don't approve of you. They approve of your mask, and you know the difference. The 17th truth is that men waste their lives seeking approval because they believe the lie that approval creates safety. If I'm approved of, I'm safe. If I'm valued, I'm secure. If I'm accepted, I'm protected. But Jung understood that this safety is illusion. Approval is conditional and temporary. It can be withdrawn instantly. The boss who valued you fires you when numbers drop. The partner who approved of you leaves when you stop performing perfectly. Society that accepted you rejects you the moment you deviate from expectations. Real safety comes from internal stability, from knowing yourself so thoroughly that others' opinions don't destabilize you, from building a life aligned with your values so that external judgment doesn't threaten your foundation. Approval creates dependence disguised as safety. Self-knowledge creates actual safety. The 18th truth is that approval seeking prevents you from discovering your purpose. Jung believed everyone has a unique purpose, something only they can contribute. But discovering this requires listening to internal signals, following authentic interests, honoring genuine talents even when they don't align with conventional success. The approval seeker can't do this. His purpose is determined by what receives approval. He pursues conventional success because that's what's valued. He abandons authentic interests because they're not respected. He develops marketable skills rather than genuine talents. And he spends his life fulfilling society's purpose for him rather than discovering his own purpose. The 19th truth is that approval seeking creates the midlife crisis Jung studied extensively. Around 40, something cracks. The approval you've accumulated feels meaningless. The success you've achieved feels empty. The life you've built feels foreign. This is your authentic self, finally breaking through decades of suppression. Jung called this the confrontation with the unconscious. All the shadow material, all the abandoned desires, all the unlived potential demands recognition. Many men medicate this crisis. Alcohol, affairs, expensive purchases, anything to quiet the screaming without addressing what's screaming. But the crisis is actually opportunity. It's your last chance to individuate. Your last chance to stop seeking approval and start living authentically. Most men don't take this opportunity. They double down on approval seeking, terrified of the chaos that authenticity would create. The 20th and final truth is that the only approval that matters is the approval you cannot buy, earn, or perform for. Your own. Jung's entire body of work points toward self-knowledge and self-acceptance. Not the self you've performed into existence. The self you actually are, shadow included, flaws included, all of it. When you know yourself completely and accept what you find, when you stop running from your authentic nature and start expressing it, when you choose internal alignment over external approval, you experience something approval-seeking never provides. Peace. Not the peace of having achieved enough. The peace of no longer needing to achieve anything to prove your worth. Write these exact words in the comments, "I approve of myself," and feel what happens when you finally claim the only validation that actually matters. That declaration shifts everything, because it's you taking back authority over your own worth. Subscribe immediately because you've demonstrated you're ready for the psychological work that most men avoid their entire lives. This channel exists for men choosing individuation over performance. Hit the like button because this message needs to reach every man exhausting himself, seeking approval he'll never receive from judges he never needed. Every person wasting their one life trying to become acceptable instead of becoming themselves. And the next video exposes another truth about masculine psychology that Jung discovered. Another pattern keeping men psychologically trapped. Another insight that will either liberate you from decades of conditioning or disturb you so completely that you'll never see your choices the same way. You'll want to witness that because Jung's work isn't about comfort. It's about consciousness. And consciousness is the only real freedom. Stay conscious, stay authentic, stay sovereign over your own approval. Because Jung knew that seeking validation from others while abandoning yourself isn't humility or consideration. It's psychological suicide. And you only get one life to stop performing and start living.